All right, diving into this stack of research on a question that never gets old, really. Creativity and mental illness, are they connected?
Yeah.
You know, like, are creative geniuses more likely to experience, well, mental illness?
Right, right.
And we've got some great stuff here from Dean Keith Simonton.
Yeah, he's like the leading expert on this.
Exactly.
It looks like you're especially interested in what he has to say about those who, reach the top of their creative field.
Absolutely. Those who achieve real eminence, greatness in their creative endeavors.
Eminence. His work on that is especially interesting.
So maybe a good place to start is with his take on the whole mad genius idea, that stereotype that's been around forever.
Right. I mean, it's a sensitive topic, but he doesn't shy away from it, He really digs into the research and adds some much-needed nuance to the conversation.
Okay, so what's his take? I mean, does he think there's a real link between creativity and mental illness, or is it all just a bunch of romanticized nonsense?
Well, he acknowledges there is a correlation between mental illness and achieving, greatness in some creative fields.
Okay.
Especially writing, actually. For instance, studies have shown a higher rate of, depression, alcoholism, even suicide among some of the most eminent writers.
Wow, that's kind of alarming.
Yeah, it is.
Like, if you're a writer, maybe you should read those studies.
Yeah.
But wait a minute, he's not saying mental illness causes creativity, right?
Right, exactly. He really emphasizes it's not a straightforward cause and effect relationship. He points out that explorers, for example, they also demonstrate a high level of creativity.
Right.
But they tend to be unusually mentally stable.
Yeah. Imagine, leading an expedition into the unknown.
Exactly.
While battling some serious mental health challenges.
Yeah, good luck with that. You're not going to get very far, are you?
Not very far, no. You need a certain amount of resilience and stability to do something like that.
Right.
It suggests that different types of creativity might have different relationships with mental illness.
Yeah. Exactly. And he also found, this is interesting, he found a crossover interaction, as he calls it, in science.
Okay.
Where revolutionary scientists, the ones who really change the way we think, show a positive correlation with psychopathology. But the scientists who, kind of stick to the existing norms actually show a negative correlation.
That's so wild. I never would have guessed that, going against the grain in science might be tied to those kinds of mental states.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty amazing, isn't it?
It really makes you think.
Yeah, it challenges those assumptions, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
It leads to all these, fascinating questions about the nature of creativity itself. And what Simonton proposes is that certain mental states, like what's called cognitive disinhibition, actually might enhance creativity under specific circumstances.
Okay, so remind me, what exactly is cognitive disinhibition?
Sure. It's basically a reduced ability to filter out information, kind of like having a wider attentional lens. So, someone with cognitive disinhibition might be taking in more stimuli, making connections others wouldn't.
Interesting. So in a way, it's almost like a superpower, right?
Yeah.
I mean, in certain creative fields, being able to make those unusual connections, to see things others don't, that could be a huge advantage.
Absolutely, yeah. And Simonton, he connects this to something he calls diversifying experiences.
Yeah.
These could be things like, unconventional backgrounds, challenging life events, even in some cases, mild forms of what might be considered, psychopathology.
Okay.
And his argument is that these experiences, they can broaden a person's perspective. And that can lead to, more unique and innovative ideas.
It's almost like those experiences, even the difficult ones, give you a different lens to look through, right?
Yeah.
A different way of seeing the world.
Exactly.
And that can be so valuable in creative fields.
Yeah, I think so. And it makes you wonder, could those very things that make us different, the things we might see as weaknesses or struggles, could those be the key to unlocking, our own creative potential?
It's a great question.
It's a question worth exploring, definitely.
Yeah, for sure.
And it goes to the heart of Simonton's point that the relationship between creativity and mental illness isn't one size fits all. It really varies depending on the creative domain and individual differences.
Right. So we can't just slap the Mad Genius label on someone and call it a day.
No, definitely not. He encourages us to consider the complexities of both creativity and mental illness to really try to understand both. There's no easy answer here.
It sounds like he's saying, hey, let's acknowledge there might be a connection here, but let's also recognize it's complicated.
Yeah, exactly.
And there are so many other factors at play.
Right. He emphasizes that what might be like advantageous for a writer, for example, might not be so for, say, a scientist or an explorer.
Right.
And then you've got the whole intricate interplay of genetics, environment, personal experiences. I mean, it's a spectrum, not a simple yes or no.
It's fascinating to think about how those individual differences, including those related to mental health, can have such a profound impact on the creative process.
Right. It really is.
So let's talk about some specific examples. I mean, are there any real-world cases that illustrate this complex relationship between creativity and mental illness? What does it actually look like in practice?
Well, one of the most, famous examples Simonton discusses is Vincent van Gogh, the painter.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Struggles with mental illness are well documented. His life and work, they provide like a really compelling case study for exploring those complex connections.
Van Gogh is often held up as, like, the ultimate tortured artist, right?
Yeah.
But does Simonton's research actually support that view?
Well, his approach is a lot more nuanced. He doesn't
Wow.
deny that potential correlation between Van Gogh's mental state and his artistic output, but he encourages us to to go beyond simple cause and effect. Right.
To really look deeper into the complexities at play.
So it's not about saying Van Gogh was a brilliant artist because he was mentally ill.
Right. It's more about recognizing that his experiences with mental illness, they probably shaped his perceptions, his emotions, his whole way of seeing the world, which, in turn influenced his art.
It makes you wonder, could he have created the same art without those experiences?
I don't know.
Would it have had the same, raw emotional intensity?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's one that Simonton doesn't try to answer definitively. He acknowledges it's impossible to know for sure.
I guess we can't really go back and rewrite history, can we?
Nope.
But it's fascinating to think about.
It is.
It's like how those individual differences, including those related to mental health, can have such a profound impact on the creative process.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's important to remember, Simonton isn't romanticizing mental illness.
Right.
He's not saying suffering is necessary for creativity.
Right. He's simply acknowledging that it can be, part of the equation for some individuals, shaping their perspectives and influencing their work.
Right. And he's careful to caution against making, sweeping generalizations.
Right.
Each case is unique with its own complex set of factors. So while Van Gogh's story might fit a certain narrative, it's important to remember that, it's not representative of all creative individuals.
Right.
Or even all artists.
Exactly. And to further illustrate that point, let's shift gears a little bit and consider a different type of creative genius like Albert Einstein. Simonton notes that Einstein, he didn't exhibit the same kind of, overt psychopathology as someone like Van Gogh.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, you don't really hear those same kinds of stories about Einstein, do you? So how does Simonton's Darwinian perspective apply to someone like that? Someone who doesn't fit the traditional mad genius mold.
Well, remember, Simonton's theory, it really highlights the importance of generating lots of ideas, right? Variations, as he calls them.
Okay.
And Einstein, he was incredibly prolific.
Yeah.
He came up with, a vast number of ideas throughout his career,
Right.
many of them very radical, challenging existing scientific paradigms.
So I guess that aligns with that Darwinian idea, right?
Yeah.
Like the idea of generating lots of variations, some of which will be more successful than others.
Yeah, exactly. And Simonton suggests that Einstein's cognitive style, his ability to kind of see the world in this completely different way, it may have been linked to certain personality traits that he refers to as the Darwinian personality profile.
Okay, wait, hold on. Darwinian personality, what exactly does that mean?
Well, essentially, Simonton, he identifies certain personality traits that might contribute to this unique way of thinking.
Right.
These traits, they often involve being open to new experiences, unconventional thinking, and, a willingness to challenge the status quo.
So even though Einstein might not fit that, that traditional image of the mad genius, his creative process still aligns with Simonton's Darwinian framework.
Exactly. And Simonton's research, it suggests that this framework, it can be applied across a wide range of creative domains. Art, science, literature, beyond.
That's pretty remarkable if you think about it. It's like there might be some underlying principles of creativity that cut across all these different disciplines.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go back to this fascinating concept. We talked about it earlier, the cognitive disinhibition. Simonton suggests that this mental state, in the right circumstances, it can actually boost creativity.
Right. Yes.
And just so we're all on the same page, cognitive disinhibition, that refers to, a reduced ability to filter out information, right?
Right, yeah.
It's kind of like having a wider attentional lens. You're taking in more, making connections others might miss.
Right. And that can lead to more, diverse and original ideas.
It's like a secret weapon for creative thinking.
Yeah, in some ways it can be, but it's important to remember, like many things, cognitive disinhibition, it has its downsides too.
Sure.
For instance, it can also lead to difficulty focusing.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Or increased distractibility.
So it's another example of that, that double-edged sword we talked about earlier.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like too much of a good thing can sometimes be a bad thing.
Yeah.
It seems to be about finding that balance.
Right.
I mean, Simonton's research, it suggests that a certain degree of cognitive disinhibition can be, beneficial for creativity, but like too much.
Right.
And it can actually be detrimental.
Right.
So where's that sweet spot? The tricky thing to figure out, isn't it?
Yeah.
It makes you wonder about how much control we really have over our own cognitive processes.
Yeah.
And how those processes impact our creative potential.
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that researchers are still exploring. But Simonton's work definitely provides some, valuable insights into that complex interplay between the mind, mental states, and creativity.
This has been really interesting.
Yeah.
A really eye-opening deep dive into Simonton's research. It's challenged my thinking, about creativity and mental illness. And honestly, it's made me think about the whole creative process in a new light.
Yeah, me too.
It's really made me think.
And we've only scratched the surface. Simonton's work, it goes so much deeper.
Oh, I'm sure it does.
He explores all of these facets of creativity and its relationship to personality, intelligence, cultural influences. I mean, it's really fascinating stuff.
I'm already feeling inspired to learn more, to kind of dig a little deeper into this stuff. But for now, I think we need to take a quick break.
Yeah, okay.
When we come back, we'll continue this conversation.
Sounds good.
We'll delve into Simonton's concept of those diversifying experiences and how it might help us understand the creative journey.
Okay, stay tuned, folks. We'll be right back.
Welcome back. We've been talking about Dean Keith Simonton's work and, that whole Mad Genius thing.
Yeah, whether there's really a link between creativity and mental illness.
Right. And one of the things that Simonton really emphasizes is that it's not as simple as just saying, oh, creative people are more likely to be mentally ill.
It's more nuanced than that.
Much more. And remember we were talking about cognitive disinhibition.
Yeah, that idea of having a reduced ability to filter out information.
Exactly. Simonton suggests that in the right context, that can actually be a real asset for creative people.
It's almost like having a wider lens, right? You're taking in more information, making connections that other people might miss.
Exactly. And that leads us to another fascinating idea. He talks about diversifying experiences.
Okay, remind me what he means by that.
So basically, he's saying that all sorts of experiences can contribute to a person's creative potential, even things that we might typically think of as negative.
Like what? Well, things like, coming from an unconventional background or going through challenging life events, even experiences that might be associated with mental illness.
So it's not that those experiences directly cause creativity.
Right.
But they can shape your perspective, the way you see the world, and ultimately influence your creative output.
Yeah, exactly. Think about it this way. Someone who's faced a lot of adversity, who's had to navigate difficult emotions or situations, they might develop a really unique way of looking at things.
And that different perspective can be really valuable, especially in creative fields.
Absolutely. It's like, those travel experiences that kind of shake you up a bit, make you question your assumptions.
Yeah, the ones that take you out of your comfort zone.
Right. And in the end, those experiences, even the tough ones, they can actually help you grow and become more creative.
That's a really interesting way to think about it. It's like even those things that we might consider weaknesses or struggles, they can actually be strengths in disguise.
Exactly. And it's a good reminder that everyone's creative journey is different. We all have our own unique set of experiences that shape who we are and how we create.
This is really resonating with me. I'm starting to see how Simonton's ideas can apply not just to famous artists and scientists, but to all of us.
Yeah, definitely. It's a reminder that we all have the potential to be creative in our own way, and that those experiences, even the tough ones, They can be sources of inspiration and fuel our creative journeys.
So as we're wrapping up our deep dive into Simonton's work, are there any other key takeaways you think are important for our listeners?
Well, one thing I think is really important to remember is that creative genius, it's not just about raw talent.
It's not like you're just born with it.
Right. It's also about persistence, hard work, and a willingness to keep generating ideas, even if a lot of them don't work out.
It's like what we were talking about earlier with Darwin.
Yeah, exactly. Years and years of research before he finally came up with his theory of evolution.
It's inspiring. In a way, it shows that even the most brilliant minds, they have to put in the time and effort.
Absolutely. And Simonton also talks about the importance of being open to new experiences, challenging conventional thinking, being willing to go against the grain.
That's a good reminder for all of us, I think, to not be afraid to try new things and think outside the box.
And to embrace those things that make us different, those unique experiences that shape our perspective.
Yeah, because those are often the things that fuel our creativity.
Exactly. And the last thing I'll say is that it's important to remember that there's no one right way to be creative. What works for one person might not work for another.
Right. It's about finding your own path, your own process.
Absolutely.
Well, this has been an incredibly insightful deep dive into Dean Keith Simonton's research. I feel like I've learned so much about the creative process and all the different factors that influence it.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you. And for our listeners, I hope this conversation has sparked your curiosity to learn more about Simonton's work.
And maybe even inspired you to tap into your own creative potential.
Until next time, keep those creative sparks flying.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been having this really thought-provoking conversation about creativity and mental illness, diving into Dean Keith Simonton's research.
Yeah, it's a fascinating area, isn't it?
It really is. And what I appreciate about Simonton is that he doesn't shy away from the complexities. He acknowledges those potential links between mental illness and creativity, especially for writers. But he also stresses that correlation isn't causation.
Exactly. He's always reminding us that it's not a simple cause and effect relationship.
And there are so many other factors to consider, individual differences, the demands of different creative fields. It's like a giant puzzle with all these pieces.
A puzzle with a lot of missing pieces, probably.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like there's this one-size-fits-all explanation for creativity. Simonton's work really encourages us to think beyond those simplistic. So I'm curious, what are some of the things that have really stood out to you from Simonton's research? What are those key takeaways that you think our listeners should keep in mind?
Well, one thing that's really stuck with me is the idea that creativity isn't just about raw talent.
Like you're not just born a creative genius.
Right. It's also about hard work, persistence, and a willingness to keep generating ideas, even if a lot of them don't pan out.
It's like that famous Edison quote, right? Genius is 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration.
Exactly. And Simonton's research really supports that notion. He talks about how important it is to keep experimenting, refining your ideas, and not being afraid to fail along the way.
And, we talked earlier about Darwin and how he spent years and years developing his theory of evolution. I mean, that's a perfect example of that kind of persistent effort, isn't it?
Absolutely. And Simonton also emphasizes the importance of embracing those things that make you different, those unique experiences that shape your perspective.
Yeah. That's something I think a lot of us struggle with, feeling like we need to fit in or conform to certain expectations.
It's easy to get caught up in that, but I think Simonton's work is a good reminder to embrace those things that make us stand out, those quirks and unconventional experiences that can actually fuel our creativity.
It's like those travel experiences that totally shake up your worldview. They might be uncomfortable at the time, but they ultimately make you a more well-rounded and interesting person.
Right. And sometimes those are the experiences that lead to the most creative breakthroughs. They force you to see things in a new light, to question your assumptions, and to come up with fresh ideas.
So if someone is listening to this and feeling like, okay, I want to be more creative, but where do I even start? What advice would you give them based on what we've learned from Simonton's research?
I think one of the most important things is to just start creating. Don't worry about being perfect or coming up with groundbreaking ideas right away. Just start exploring, experimenting, and see where it takes you.
It's about giving yourself permission to play, to make mistakes, and to learn from those mistakes.
And remember, there's no one right way to be creative. What works for one person might not work for another. So find those approaches and practices that resonate with you.
I love that. It's about embracing your own unique creative journey.
Exactly. And I think another important piece of advice is to cultivate that sense of curiosity. Be open to new experiences, ask questions, explore different perspectives.
It's like being a lifelong learner, always seeking out new knowledge and inspiration.
Absolutely. And I think that's really at the heart of what creativity is all about, isn't it? This constant process of exploration, discovery, and growth.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. We've explored some really complex and fascinating ideas about creativity and mental illness, and I hope our listeners have found this deep dive into Dean Keith Simonton's research as enlightening as I have.
I agree. It's been a great conversation, and I hope it's inspired our listeners to think more deeply about their own creative potential.
So to wrap things up, I just want to say thank you to our expert for sharing their insights with us today. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey.
Until next time, keep those creative sparks flying.
And remember, the world needs your unique voice and your creative contributions.